Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and today I am joined by a very special guest. He is one of the Action Network's finest college football analysts. His name is Josh Nunn, and if you're not familiar with Josh's work, he specializes in FCS football as well as the Group of Five, but he's going to walk us through everything that he's seeing in terms of the offseason futures market, and that's really what's starting to percolate up to the surface here. We got odds to win conferences, odds to make the college football playoff, and now finally a robust offering of win totals all the way down the Group of Five ladder. So before we get into that, Josh, I also just want to give some information on where people can find you. I mentioned the Action Network app. You're always going to be writing up college football for us. You can also find him in the Action Network app in terms of tracking his picks. He is under his nickname Duck, and you can go ahead and follow him over on Twitter or X at StepOnADuck1. A shout out to Rodney Dangerfield for making that joke famous in Caddyshack. Josh, how you doing?
Doing great, Mike. Yeah, the season is quickly approaching. We're less than 100 days away from kickoff. We've had some exciting news in the offseason with all of the transfer portal activity that's been going on. It's the highest amount of activity ever for that. And just last night, Group of Five regular season wins totals had dropped. So it's really exciting to dive in and find some value in the win total markets and the derivative markets at this time.
I'm going to ask a question right off the jump here in terms of the futures market setting these numbers. Sportsbooks are now in this race to be able to post it first. And obviously, when you do that, you expose yourself a little bit and sharps can come in and hammer a number. Do you think it's even more difficult for both the sportsbook and the casual fan to keep up with these teams year over year because of such dramatic roster turnover?
I certainly do. I think it's a struggle to try to identify exactly what these teams are going to look like year to year. We've seen the trend in the transfer portal, especially at the Group of Five level, where teams have just been decimated with talent. No longer is the case where you have a great talent at a Group of Five school that plays for really a legacy year over year, multiple years at one school. They're having a standout year, and they're jumping ship to the Power Five. The NIL and the money and the deals that are out there is really changing the landscape of college football, and the rich are getting richer. So I think it is a little bit more difficult to really identify in these Group of Five leagues exactly what these teams are going to look like. They're trying to make their best guess. I think the books actually did put out some pretty good numbers on the Power Four schools. We haven't seen a lot of movement in those regular season wins up to this point, save for maybe Wake Forest and Kentucky. But I think the Group of Five will see a little bit more volatility in those markets.
Now, you mentioned the G5, they're harvested year over year. It's almost like this minor league system for the Power Four schools. But there are some G5 programs that have made a financial commitment. You look at the Horseshoe Collective at Boise. They famously were able to keep Ashton Genty away from some SEC suitors. He ends up in New York City at the Heisman presentation. And then Memphis has this huge influx of money. When you break it down conference by conference, you usually view one or two schools that financially have a serious advantage over their competition at the G5 level.
Well, the most staggering one is in Conference USA. Liberty has money and they spend money, and they've really bought into making their football team prominent, and they're not afraid to bust out the pocketbook. So case in point this year with Liberty, I think they're head and shoulders above many of the other teams in Conference USA and should make another run for that league.
The one elements that I'm enamored with year over year is coaching turnover and the domino effect that impacts the G5 level, because you see a lot of coaches leave very late in a cycle, almost a brand new cycle. They'll get through spring. You've seen head coaches leave to become linebacker coaches or go to the NFL. They're sick of the NIL grind and not having money to compete. Or you just see, some, horse trading in terms of assistants moving up to coordinators backfilling some of these head coaching vacancies. So there's a lot of moving parts and a big continuity issue for these G5 teams. Philosophically, how do you grapple with that with a lot of teams that you may be interested in either tailing or fading in 2025, having brand new staffs?
Well, I think it's another effect concomitant to what the transfer portal has opened up. You have not only head coaches that change, and my goodness, we had 45 of them this year in FBS, but you have offensive and defensive coordinator positions that change hands, and then those players leave their schools and come to the new place, and when they land, they often bring position coaches with them. And who else do they bring? They bring 6 or 7 of their stud players that were remaining on their side of the ball that they coach, and those players follow the coordinator to the new school, which just further provokes a shakeup in these rosters. So it's real interesting to dive into the coordinator changes. You'll also find too, especially at the Group of Five level, that you might have a coordinator that has a completely different scheme than what the previous regime had ran. So you want to also try to assess if teams have adequate personnel to run the new system, as a lot of these systems are unique. The checks and the keys at the line of scrimmage are a lot different than maybe what players are used to. And it may take a couple of weeks of looking foolish on the field to really grasp what the spirit of the scheme is trying to do on the field.
About, I want to say 10 years ago now, I was working at NBC Sports and Operations, and in the late winter, early spring window, I would sit at my desk after I got my work done and just watch spring game cut-ups. And people would walk by, "Oh, what are you watching? Is that a game?" "No, that's a practice." "Oh, you're clearly disturbed. You are a sicko watching these practices." But you could actually glean so much from those situations if you were looking at the right matchups, if you're looking at quarterback battles or new offensive philosophies, defensive philosophies. But that's almost been stripped away from the college game in this modern NIL transfer portal era, because people don't want the word to get out that, "Oh, this guy who's second or third on my depth chart actually has speed to burn. He's going to be the next big thing for us." Well, schools can come in, offer him a bag and say, "Why don't you be a big thing this fall instead of sitting on the shelf for an additional year?" How do you compete with the issue of information and the lack thereof when it comes to spring games, when it comes to videos of practices, anything like that, that you probably used in previous seasons to be able to build some of your intel in the offseason?
It's a great question, dynamic question. It's really unfortunate because this really started to take off a couple of years ago, where teams were putting their spring games on national TV. And then almost immediately after the conclusion of the spring game, you'd see that these players were entering the portal and they had a landing spot almost immediately. And so coaches have decided to shake up their spring rhythm, and they've already, a lot of places have changed the complexity of what the spring game looks like as well, and it doesn't hardly even resemble football anymore. I mean, my goodness, 2 years ago and last year we had 40 or 50 spring games that were televised. This year it was 12, and so it's really dying off. I used to love really tuning into spring games because it was just myself, the notebook, and I could just sit in quiet for 2 hours and really hone in on what I saw on the field with the spirited competition that actually resembled football. But I'm here to tell you that is going away quickly, and it is really sad for my preparation. So I'm really having to try to prepare in new ways, and I'm trying to have to obtain information other ways, because relying on the spring game as kind of a Cliff Notes cheat sheet is no longer something I'm able to do with most of the teams.
Without access or crystal ball to figure out what these depth charts are going to look like, a true understanding of how these rosters are going to shake out, you're not operating purely in the dark. But obviously, you have to rely a bit more on your instinct and kind of your overall strategy. So when you look to build your full portfolio of offseason win totals and teams to win their respective conferences or make the college football playoff, where are you looking to attack first to kind of build that foundation?
Well, really, that's driven by what markets are released. But I think that the first thing that you have to do is you have to assess in your preparation how much time you're going to dedicate to really diving into the rosters line by line. There are sites that are out there that are available that are tracking the portal moves, and there are some that have also created a kind of a pseudo two deep for each side of the ball. And so you really can get a feel for the returning players that have been there, along with people that are transferring in, to try to piecemeal together what these teams may look like. It really makes a difference with the most important position on the field, which is quarterback, how the offensive and defensive lines are shaking out, what players were added in the skill positions, how the secondary looks, all things that are prerequisites to doing research anyway. But from there, what I'm trying to assess is kind of conference by conference where these teams are staging themselves to jockey for position and where they might have an edge over the rest of their competition. And we saw, especially with the regular season wins, for years and years in gambling, we would see that the regular season wins market was released in Vegas always around Memorial Day, and you'd have the casinos that would lay those out. Well, it's crazy this year. We had regular season wins 2 weeks after the Super Bowl, and so there was really an opportunity to dive into the Power Four and really assess what those numbers look like. The only problem was those regular season wins were released, and we still had a whole nother transfer portal window. And so it was really hard for me to do a lot of assessment on a win total for those programs when we still had players that were changing hands. So I took a pause on that. I still did deep dive the rosters and just took kind of a pause on trying to fire away on any regular season wins. But the second most critical thing, and it cannot be overlooked, is you've got to dive into the schedule line by line. There's a whole piece we could do on that, but diving into the schedule and really assessing what you see and trying to find those different scheduling spots is so critically important when you're talking about a 12-game regular season win sample size.
When you look at this year over year, having done this for a long time, made your own personal bets before you were advocating on the Action Network for where to place your money in the offseason, you have to agree that there's always, a bit of a bias for overs. No one is looking to tie up their money from a casual perspective to root for things not to happen. I think it's just human nature. And certainly in the transfer portal era, nearly every school has something to be excited about, some new skill position toy to be able to unleash on their conference, a transfer quarterback, a new offensive system. So in your opinion, do these numbers, by and large, I understand you got to go through on a case-by-case basis, but by and large, they skew a little bit to the over and makes you a contrarian targeting more unders than overs?
Really truer words have never been spoken, and I think we see that in a lot of different betting markets, even outside of college football, where people will root for their favorite team or the perceived better team in the favorite, and also high scoring or for teams to be successful. So you do pay a small premium that's baked in for betting the favorite and also betting on the over. And so what I have found as well, there's a lot more involved with the mathematics, but the poor man's math is you can add up all the regular season win numbers and try to create a path for each team to go over, and there's just simply not enough games. There's a small percentage that's baked in and shaded to the over, could be in the juice, could be in the number itself, but 90% of my regular season win plays over the last 10 years have been on teams to finish under their projected win total. I think there's a lot of value in this emerging market with regular season wins. I love the fact that the regular season wins derivative market has exploded in popularity. And I find that there's a lot of value in finding teams that are going through positional turmoil, that have had coaching changes, that have quirky spots in their schedule. And there are just some things to identify that often can get overlooked that can create in-season friction for teams. Oftentimes those teams result in going under their posted win total.
And when it comes to shopping around, something we stress consistently throughout the regular season and the off season, books they hang different numbers. And obviously their job is not to predict exactly what's going to happen. Their job is to get equal action on both sides of a bet. So because of that, you can see a 5.5 or 6 or sometimes a 6.5 across a market on a team that's kind of a fringe bowl team. So how much work do you put in grabbing the best number? And then when it comes to, finally grabbing one on either end of the spectrum, whether you feel it's overpriced or underpriced by a game, a half a game, how often do you then start to target some of those hedge opportunities where a season may come down to one game that you have circled maybe on their conference schedule, and then all of a sudden, that's your out. If you're not, liking the way that it's looking, or you could double down if it's going in the opposite direction, basically looking for those opportunities to mitigate risk and to maximize profit.
Well, it's really hugely critically important. And you touched on one specific thing, which is trying to put yourself in the best situation possible to succeed by getting the best number at the best odds. Week to week, this is critically important, and it's also important in regular season wins. Here at the Action Network, we certainly advocate for that. We provide odds comparison tools to provide our following to be in situations to be successful. And it's the quickest and easiest thing that you can do as a sports bettor to increase your ROI year over year. It takes very little talent. It just takes a little bit of time to perform that. So I would encourage anybody, shop around, get yourself in the best position to be successful, have several opportunities. Don't just limit yourself to one shop. Specifically when it comes to regular season wins, you will still find some inefficiencies in the market from book to book. And there are oftentimes, one example right now is Wake Forest. Their regular season win total over-under is 4.5. Not a recommendation, but if you wanted to bet over, that price is anywhere from minus 115 to minus 135. And the difference in the VIG that you're laying in that wager is hugely different between those two numbers. You have to win so many more wagers at minus 135 or minus 140 to break even as opposed to minus 115. So I would recommend that you figure out a way to calculate that math or understand how the mathematics works and get yourself in a position to get the most favorable odds. The other thing that I will look at from time to time, depending on the play that I'm looking to make when it comes to a regular season win wager, is oftentimes books will have variance in the actual number. This is critically important in college football. The reason why, there's only 12 games in the regular season. This is not an MLB regular season win total that's 93.5 or 94 or 92.5, where it really may not make that much of a difference over 162 games. There's 12 games, and a half a win either way can improve your position on the wager by about 8% or so. And so it's really important to try to identify if the math works in your favor. I personally value a half a win at about 60 or 70 cents. So if I can get under 5.5 at minus 120, and if I can get under 6 at minus 165 or so, that under 6 is a better wager in my opinion, because that difference in the VIG is less than 60 cents. So I'm going to take under 6. I also find that gets magnified, the value gets magnified specifically in regular season wins of 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5. Why would that be? Well, those are fringe teams that are competing for a bowl game. And so you're finding that half a win can really be something that's in your favor to have half a win up on the under and half a win down on the over when you have teams that are competing for bowl eligibility in the second, third, fourth to last week of the season, and then fighting for it in that last week of the season. So there are definitely situations that I see a lot of value in paying a little more juice to get that half win when it comes to regular season wins.
When you look at teams coming off outlier years, whether it was Notre Dame making it all the way to the college football national championship and also being one of the most public teams in all of sports, or in the opposite direction, a team like Florida State bottoming out, essentially getting in a position where they had a clean house with a lot of their assistants, they had to move in a different direction, that hangover effect from what Georgia did against them in that bowl game after the college football playoff snub, they never got off the mat, they never recovered. But in terms of the market, do you see an overreaction to these outlier seasons, whether it's a team really overachieving or a team really going in the opposite direction?
I generally do. Our friend Stuckey has said it for years that you're betting on 18 to 22-year-old kids and they play with an oddly shaped ball, and sometimes the bounces go your way for the course of an entire season. Sometimes it goes against you. And I do find that teams that have extreme outlier seasons generally will regress back to the mean. It may not be a full regression in year one, but they will creep down towards that middle of their performance level unless a program has just completely elevated and changed their entire situation, which can happen, but it's rare. Specific to the G5 level this year, a team that I think could be in a position such as that is Washington State. They went on a really big tear last year, playing a favorable schedule that included the agreement with the Mountain West to play Mountain West teams. They rattled off several wins. There was even some crazy talk about them making the playoff before they stubbed their toe against New Mexico and Wyoming late in the season. They had a dynamic offense and an exceptional player at quarterback in John Mateer. Well, what happens this year? The regime is gone and off to Wake Forest. A lot of the players have transferred out, specifically Mateer going to Oklahoma. They add in FCS head coaching staff and 24, 25 FCS players within the two deep. Well, that talent level, top to bottom for Washington State, has just now dropped a notch. Now, the other thing that you have with Washington State is they're playing a true independent schedule, and you can go through it and look line by line, but there's no conference affiliation. They're playing a home and home with Oregon State to just try to fill the games. They have a crazy travel schedule where they have to go to Colorado State, they go to North Texas, they go to Ole Miss and Virginia back to back, and then they still go way out east to James Madison late in the season. I'll tell you what, man, when I go on vacation and I'm traveling somewhere and I come home, I'm tired. And to do that 5 or 6 times on those long road trips is just taxing on your mental fortitude, and it's taxing on your body. And so I think Washington State could be one of those teams where you might see some of that regression because the talent is less, the schedule sets up unfavorably. It might be a tough year for the Cougs up there in Pullman.
You talked about Wazoo losing so much in terms of their identity and their star players. Returning production is something that Bill Connelly has banged that drum for years over at ESPN. He's built out one of the cornerstone metrics that people really follow. And in the NIL transfer portal era, there's just less and less continuity. But when you break it down under the hood, specifically, what are you valuing more in terms of returning production? Is it quarterback play? Is it offensive line starts? Maybe continuity between the quarterback, the head coach, and the play caller? Or are there any other specific stats that I haven't mentioned yet?
I'm really glad you brought that up. So broad brush painting here to answer this question is depending on who is doing the returning production or the TARP metric for the adding in the transfers, people can weigh these metrics different ways. Generally, just specific to offense, they'll take in a quarterback and what was the percentage of that team's passing yards that were returning. On the offensive line, it was the total percentage of snaps that are returning. For wide receivers and tight ends, percentage of receiving yards returning, and then with the running backs, it's the total percentage of rushing yards returning. And you can weigh those at different levels depending on how important you feel those are, and then you aggregate those numbers out and you get your offensive returning production. Now, I think that there is some varying theory on that because there are some positions that could be easier to absorb losses on than others. And the transfer portal also creates an opportunity where you may lose a really explosive, dynamic player who filled up the stat sheet, and you may replace him with someone else. And even if that player didn't specifically perform, say, at the Power 4 level, they may have exceptional talent and they will perform at the G5. So you can kind of play with the modeling on how you want to weigh those numbers. Generally, for me, you cannot understate the importance of the offensive line, which is the heartbeat of the offense. You can't do anything if your offensive line has no continuity. If they can't run block, if they cannot pass protect, if they can't check at the line of scrimmage, the offense is just not going to work fluidly. And so I really do focus on continuity on the offensive line. And on the flip side, where's the continuity on the defensive front seven? If you have a team that has had even mediocre or above performance in sacks, tackles for loss, other havoc numbers such as QB pressures, tackles behind the line of scrimmage or for no gain, and all of that performance is gone. And then as a group of five team, you're backfilling your talent with fringe players or FCS talent. Man, that defensive havoc in the front seven is going to take a significant step back. And if you're playing solid running teams week after week after week, you're going to take a pounding, and that defense is going to fade fast. And so those are opportunities that might be a little bit more in that second or third level of your research where you can try to identify teams that might get tired. And sometimes teams don't have a bye until week 7 or 8, and so they run out of gas. And what ends up happening in the regular season win market specifically is you can identify a game on paper where a team should win, but when you look at the opponents, the scheme change or the personnel change, they're going to be gassed, and you flip that to a loss, and that right there is the value needed in order to make a position on a regular season win.
Yeah, you mentioned a few different scheduling quirks, whether it's the body blow theory from Bruce Feldman, whether it's the old letdown look ahead sandwich, shout out to the Solid Verbal and those guys pushing that narrative for years. Is there anything else in terms of travel or particular windows, short rest that pique your interest that may be a bit of a new wrinkle in the last few years of college football that we haven't seen yet?
There are, and a lot of the scheduling spots could be considered old news. You can identify sandwich spots pretty easily. There was probably no bigger sandwich spot last year than when Northern Illinois traveled to the Cathedral and squeezed in a game with Notre Dame when Notre Dame was off a big game and then on the road again for another big game. And what happened? Northern Illinois won the game on the field as 32-point underdogs. It doesn't always work out that magically, but you can find teams that might have a rival on look ahead or a lesser known rival, or they might have to travel to a service academy and maybe sneak in some prep early, which can affect them the week before. Maybe they go to Hawaii. Maybe they're doubling back from Hawaii. And so there's those sandwich spots that can definitely be tricky. Teams that are on back-to-backs, or a team that might be on the road, have a bye, on the road again, they're not playing at home for a month. What can that do for their specific psyche? There are also unique situations, maybe twice a season, where a team will be playing the late window on Saturday, let's say 10 o'clock Eastern, and then they've got to double back for a Thursday spot. Well, what that does is creates compression in your prep time, in your body recovery time, and there are situations where those teams don't perform as well. One interesting schedule circumstance that I've identified this year, we'll just throw one out there, is Akron. If you look at the Akron schedule, they don't have a bye week until November 1st. And furthermore, their season concludes November 18th, earlier than anyone else in FBS. And so if you're trying to assess what Akron's going to be this year, you can kind of go through and assess percentage likelihood that they may win certain games. But if they're sitting there at 2-5, and then they've got to go to Ball State and then go to Buffalo, what's their psyche? They can't make the postseason. If they were to be 2-5, they're not winning the MAC. There's no real preseason goals to play for. They really want to go on the road and compete against those ascending teams in conference play and then double back for your final 3 games where you're playing for nothing. Probably not a good mental situation for Akron given the scheduling circumstances and no bye week until November 1st. Just one to maybe file away in the back pocket for later.
Underdog is one of the best places to make picks during playoff basketball, and while they score buckets, you could score cash. Underdog is one of the leading sports apps, and you can play right now in your state. Their app has over 100,000 five-star reviews and millions of players. To play, all you have to do is download the app and choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats. You can choose from things like points, assists, and so much more. Once your pick feels good, you can play for as little as $1, and if you get everything right, you could win up to 1,000 times your money. That's right, turn a single dollar into $1,000 with just your sports knowledge. This Miracle Knicks run has been a blast to watch, and they are finally back in the conference finals for the first time since the year 2000. And I've been tailing Jalen Brunson along the way, and that is the beauty of Underdog. It's all about riding the hot hands. So download the Underdog app and sign up with promo code BBOC to unlock a special offer for up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. That's promo code BBOC. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply, void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. All right, Josh, we've done enough of the table setting. We've talked, broad strategies. We've talked about some of the changing landscape of college football and how to navigate this lack of information and the value of being able to pull out certain nuggets with the schedule. Let's get it into practice. How are you going to go ahead and employ some of these strategies and insights into the 2025 season? We have 5 futures, 3 from you, 2 from me, that we're going to break into. They're not all G5 specific, but we're going to start with University of Nevada, Reno, the Wolfpack. What are your thoughts on their chances this fall?
Well, I think last year you could argue that through the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, there was really no bigger surprise in college football than UNR. They were against the spread darlings. They had some exquisite performances, specifically on defense. That week 0 game where they had hosted SMU, they ended up being 28.5-point underdogs, and they were up by 16 in the fourth quarter before a collapse where they did not win the game on the field. But Nevada had several strong performances early in the season. They were covering against the spread numbers, and it was really specifically due to the play of their elite secondary, and they had some real surprising talent in the secondary. Well, all that secondary is gone. They're losing a lot of the top players that are playing in the defensive secondary. It was a team that really struggled late in the season to secure any sort of defensive pressure against opposing quarterbacks. The sack and tackle for loss numbers returning are really down. And I really struggle to get excited about this team from an offensive perspective as well. Brendan Lewis is no longer here. He transferred to Memphis. So you're relying on Chuba Purdy or A.J. Bianco. Those 2 quarterbacks really just do not wow me. They did bring in some FCS talent along the offensive line to shore up the left side of the offensive line. Certainly going to take some time to really work out some kinks there with players that are playing up in competition. Nevada loses their top 4 rushers from last season's team, so the offensive rushing production is way down. Just not a lot really there that I'm really excited about for Nevada. And then when you look at the position battles on all 3 levels of the defense, there is a lot that is going to have to be shaken out for Nevada to even try to compete in the level of football that they play. I was really surprised when we saw the regular season win released for Nevada at 4.5. I was thinking when I was shoring up my notes on Nevada that we'd see a 3.5 or a 4 tops, at which point I was ready to go under. It almost appears as though the oddsmen are baking in an FCS win here, but I'm here to tell you this. After a roadie at Penn State and Happy Valley, where they're probably going to get beat up pretty physically, Nevada has to then double back for Sac State. And if you've been following anything in the FCS level, Sac State made a real buzz in hiring Brendan Marion from UNLV, and they've got 50 transfer players on their roster, and they've really beefed up to make a run in FCS this season. That is anything but assured win for Nevada, and that'll be a real close, hard-fought game. You have to assume Sacramento State is showing up for that FBS competition. Nevada's also been a team against FCS foes where they've played with their food a bit and even lost against FCS competition, so there's no assured win there with Sac State. A couple Conference USA teams that are going to be challenges, I'd say. And then one thing that I look at is the schedule, and I want to factor in who Nevada is playing and where these teams are at in the schedule. Well, they've got the top four in Mountain West play, projected top four teams: Fresno State, Boise State, San Jose State, and UNLV all on the schedule. They've got some tougher road games at Utah State and at Wyoming, and there's just really not a lot to draw from. We talked about the mentality of a team and where they might be. I could see this team starting 2-5, 2-6, and then you've got a roadie at Utah State, and then you're not going to make a bowl game. You're not playing for any conference championship. Where's your mentality at when you have to go on the road at Wyoming? And then their last game of the season, they'll probably be, 18 to 21 point underdogs against UNLV in a game that they really shouldn't compete in. I just don't see a lot of assured wins on the UNR schedule this season. I see them as being an underdog, a significant underdog, which I would quantify as double-digit underdog in at least 7 games. I've got them favored in 2 or 3, so to get under 4.5, I think is a real solid value play, and it gives you an extra game to play with. So I did take out a position on Nevada under 4.5 regular season wins.
Yeah, when I saw this on your sheet, my first thought was, I like this coaching staff. Let me dig into the schedule. And then very quickly, it becomes clear there's no room for error. And some of their, most likely wins in conference, they're all on the road. I understand New Mexico is in a rebuild. They lose Devin Dampier. They lose their coaching staff. You still got to go on the road and win. And you add in Utah State, as you mentioned. That Wyoming game, I think, could end up being the difference in one direction or another. And to get them on November 22nd, you figure weather is going to be an issue there in Lairdice. It's going to be windy. It's going to be cold. There's probably going to be some snow in there as well. So if you are relying on Purdy to carry this offense, I could see it getting really hairy for the Wolfpack. So you've convinced me on this after diving into the fundamentals of this underplay. I'm going to come with one here that's a 2-for-1 in terms of my recommendation. Southern Miss, their win total just popped. It's 4.5 minus 115 over at DraftKings. Go ahead, hit the over there. I also love them. It's one of my favorite long shot G5 conference winner bets. 25-1 to win the Sun Belt. And let's start with this dramatic roster overhaul. This team was an absolute tire fire under Will Hall. I believe he went 4-15 in his last 19 games. Doesn't even get to coach out the rest of his season in 2024. Gets fired. They clean house, and they go ahead and they poach Charles Huff from Marshall. Now, this is a guy that not only won the Sun Belt last year, but also beat Notre Dame on the road a few years back as well. The guy is an incredible coach. He was a Nick Saban protege. And Marshall just couldn't open up their wallet and pay him enough money to stay. And Southern Miss got an incredible deal. It's not like they doubled or tripled his salary. I believe in terms of base salary, they just increased it by about $200,000 a year. Now, it is incentive laden and he can hit a bunch of bonuses, and he had a larger pool for his assistants. But I think they got an incredible deal. And not only do they get Charles Huff, but of those 36 transfers that came in, about half are from that Marshall team that, as I mentioned, just won the belt. And it includes Josh Moden, who was a 4-star recruit. He could have gone basically to any school outside of maybe 5 to 10 in terms of the entire country. He is a starter. He's someone who's going to probably be a 4th, 5th, 6th round NFL draft pick, depending on how he tests out physically at the combine. To get him on this team right away is going to shore up a defense that had real issues in their secondary. But the headline here is quarterback play, and bringing in the newcomer of the year in the Sun Belt and bringing Braylon Braxton and a coaching staff with him. I just see everything trending up for a Southern Miss offense that has been a disaster for years. You have to go back to Nick Mullen, the last time someone threw for 20-plus touchdowns for the Golden Eagles. To put it in perspective, last year, both Army and Navy individually threw for more passing touchdowns out of those traditional triple option attacks. So they are absolutely at the bottom of the barrel. But this kid comes in with a 19-2 touchdown to interception ratio. He won every single game that he started last year. His confidence is brimming. And then you also bring in Blake Anderson back into the Sun Belt. He was someone who was terminated at Utah State, but it seems like there's more to that story than it was initially reported. It was an ugly split. It was a Title IX violation related to not properly reporting a sexual assault involving one of the players. Well, since that's happened, he's done a lot to rehab his image, and he's also filed a lawsuit against the school seeking $15 million in a wrongful termination suit. It's my belief, and I'm not a legal expert, but I'm just saying, a lot of coaches that would have ended their career fully. So once again, Southern Miss gets an opportunity for, at least on the field between the lines, an incredible offensive mind to guide this offense. So I think the issue here is that the public perception is they look at how bad Southern Miss was last year, one of the worst teams in all of FBS, and they're figuring, how much can they improve year over year? The talent infusion, the coaching infusion. I didn't even mention on the defensive side of the ball, Jason Seymour is a rising star at defensive coordinator. And in addition to Moden at corner, they bring in Josh Battle from Chattanooga. He was a borderline FCS All-American. He had first team All-SoCon honors last year. The fact of the matter is this defense is going to be so much better. And when I look around the rest of the Sun Belt, particularly in the West, who am I afraid of? Arkansas State has a lot coming back offensively, but their defense was a mess. I don't think that, Butch Jones is going to get that squared away and fixed and headed in the right direction. And then Texas State, they're also replacing their quarterback as well. So I think there's some real opportunity to hit a big one, 25-1. What are your thoughts on USM going from a worst to first situation in the West?
It's hard to do. I think that it is going to require some breaks going your way, but I'm here to tell you with that regular season win, I mean that number will not stick around long. So if you like over, I would play the over now. I love the talent that's infused at this team. This Southern Miss team is going to look a lot different than the team that has been on the field the last couple of seasons. Great infusion of talent at quarterback with Braylon Braxton, as you had mentioned. I like some of the skill guys that they brought in, Micah Davis and Elijah Metcalf. I like what they have in the running back room with Robert Briggs and Matt Jones. They got a great corner that's transferred in Battle, Josh Moten from Marshall, great corner, and then Battle, FCS fringe honorable player that you had mentioned before. This team is going to have a significant uptick in talent. And I think if you just go to the schedule and you're trying to assess where this team is going to secure wins, I'm trying to look for situations where they have winnable games and not just stretch winnable games, but where this team will actually compete and feel good about their chances. Week 2 against Jackson State will have every opportunity in the world to collect a win. They host App State, who's down by their standards and is going through a rebuild of their own. Certainly winnable. At Louisiana Tech, they'll be right in the mix there. Well, now you have possibly a 3-1 start. Teams got some confidence. They can start to see that they can believe in the build and what Charles Huff is doing. He's a great motivator. He's a great players coach. Players loved him at Marshall. It was just really the administration, like you had said, that didn't step up for him. And then you got Jacksonville State, who's going through a complete rebuild. They were decimated in the portal. New coaching staff, new offensive regime. It's going to be really tough this year, I think, for Jacksonville State. That's a game Southern Miss can win. Louisiana Monroe is on the schedule, Arkansas State, even Texas State's down, as you had mentioned before. Troy is not what they once were. There's probably 7 or 8 winnable games on this schedule realistically, and that gives you a fantastic opportunity to clear 4.5. I think it's a great value play. The juice is not out of control. I'd lock in 4.5 over. I like it.
As you walk through some of those opponents, there's a likelihood that there's going to be 5 or 6 teams in the Sun Belt alone breaking in new quarterbacks against the Southern Miss team. So something to consider. From one 25-1 swing to another, who do you like in Conference USA?
Yeah, from a long shot perspective, I think Middle Tennessee actually does have a pretty decent opportunity this year to get on a run. I didn't love what the team did last year, but they do bring back some of the cornerstone pieces from their roster from last season. I like Nicholas. How do you say his last name?
Vadiato.
Yeah, Vadiato. I like Vadiato. I
feel like he's been there since pre-COVID. He had that one bowl game that he subbed in at the last minute. I feel like this guy has been on campus for 6 years.
Yeah, and I think that they do have some transfers that are beefing up the offensive line. I think they'll get a little bit more consistent offensive line play. That was sort of the problem last year for Middle Tennessee, is they really didn't have a lot of explosivity in the run game, and they couldn't be relied on to pass protect in third down situations. And I think that they're going to shore that up via the portal this year. I like what returns on the defensive side of the ball. Everybody's back on the D-line and in the linebacker core. I think they're going to shake out okay in the secondary with the players that they've brought in. I think you'll see some marginal increased improvement in what they have talent-wise and who their personnel is this year on defense. And then I dive into the schedule for Middle Tennessee. The non-conference is fairly manageable. They shouldn't get beat up too bad with Austin Peay, Nevada, and Marshall on the schedule. They do have a trip to Wisconsin, Can't imagine they'll win or really compete too heavily in that game. But oftentimes some of these group of five teams are playing two or three power fives and they get beat up so badly in the non-conference. That's not the case this year with Middle Tennessee. And then when I'm breaking down the Conference USA schedule, some things that I like for this team to potentially build their confidence and get on a roll, really all the road games are manageable. They play Kennesaw State, Delaware, Western Kentucky, and New Mexico State all on the road. Western Kentucky is one of those lesser known massive rivalries in that region with 100 miles of hate. And so there'll certainly be motivation in that one. They avoid Liberty and Louisiana Tech. And then an interesting scheduling quirk for Middle Tennessee, they've got a 4-week stretch right in the middle of the season where they only play one game, and that's a home game against Missouri State, FBS newcomer, and a Missouri State team that I think will likely struggle to compete this year, just given the roster size, the scholarship availability that they have, and the talent that they're bringing back from that Missouri Valley team. So I think that they're not really a serious threat to really do much of anything in Conference USA. There is Missouri State. But you're going to have this stretch of time where Middle Tennessee is going to be able to get healthy. They'll be able to regroup and rally the troops, assess what went well during the first 5-6 games of the season, and then really identify spots that they need to probably shore up their performance. And then they can really get on a run there with Delaware, Jacksonville State, FIU. This is a team that has a lot of winnable conference games. They pull the bottom 5 perceived teams in league play. And it's just one of those situations where you're going to have some tricky spots, primarily that at Western Kentucky spot on November 15th, and then at New Mexico State to close out the season. But this is surely a spot where you can grab a play on Middle Tennessee to win the league now, and then you can find your hedge spot later on in the season to maybe go the other way and still guarantee yourself some profit. I also have a fair market value on this play of about 16 to 1 or 18 to 1, so you're definitely getting the better of the odds at 25 to 1 with Middle Tennessee. So it is a long shot future. You're going to have some breaks go your way. You're probably going to have to win a game that you shouldn't, but they have certainly a better than 25 to 1 chance to get to that conference championship game where they'll likely play Liberty, and then you can assess what you want to do from there. But I think we're in a good position with Middle Tennessee.
Just a quick follow-up there, assuming that it is Liberty waiting for them in the title game. What are your thoughts on them bouncing back this year, moving on in the post-Salter era under this coaching staff that has continuity? Jamie Chadwell, it's always surprised me that he has not moved up to a bigger job, but certainly he has an opportunity now to lead a team to not only show that 2 years ago wasn't a fluke making it to the Fiesta Bowl, but last year, not only did they lose to a team like Kennesaw State, but they just looked like they were going through the motions. There was something missing. There was an it factor missing offensively. Do you expect them to come back with a vengeance in 2025?
I do. Kind of felt like they let it slip through the wickets a little bit. It was very surprising, Liberty having gone through that stretch of games during the middle of the season where, like you had just said, they were just going through the motions. Caden Salter didn't seem to play with urgency. He was missing easy throws that would have extended drives and put their team in better situations. And then, my goodness, losing as 26-point favorites against Kennesaw State was just absolutely stunning. One of the most stunning results of the entire season at any level, in my opinion. I think that they do have definitely some pieces. They've got a lot that's returning. I like their quarterback pickup in Ethan Vasco. I think he'll fill in just fine. I think the running back room is still shored up okay. I think that the schedule calls for, probably, again, one of those situations where you're trying to assess where a team's performance is going to go. What do they have in the non-conference? Their non-conference, save for James Madison, is actually pretty manageable. They're catching Bowling Green in a bit of a rebuild with new regime and new personnel, Jacksonville State, Maine. And then when you factor the conference slate, I think that, just looking at their opponents with UTEP, New Mexico State, the two newcomers from FBS in Delaware and Missouri State, it's just really hard to identify from the chair that we're sitting in now where there's too many stumbling blocks. They end the season with a couple road trips at FIU and at Louisiana Tech before possibly getting some surprising revenge needed on Kennesaw State to close out the season. But I just don't see a tremendous amount of landmine spots in this schedule for Liberty to where it's hard to see them not kind of getting on a roll and and exerting kind of that will and their frustration over what kind of happened last year. I like Jamie Chadwell. I think he's a fantastic coach. He's won everywhere he's been. And I think this is one of those years where we can likely see them play with a little bit more attitude and a little bit more urgency, given some of those results that slipped through their fingers last year. I would expect that to be the case for Liberty.
It was difficult last fall, particularly in the first 6 weeks of the season, to have to move off a team, a program that had become really a darling of the BBOC podcast, and that was UTSA, hashtag Meet Meep. We love Jeff Traylor around here. He won back-to-back Conference USA titles. He amassed a 22-2 conference record between 2021 and 2023. But last year was a rebuild. Now they got things moving in the right direction at the end of the year, and I'll come back and touch on that in just a second. But this all starts with the fact that they are priced at plus 650 to win the American. I'm interested because of the schedule. They avoid Navy and Memphis, and they get to host Tulane and Army. In terms of the top teams in the AAC, skipping two of them and hosting the other two is ideal. As I mentioned, 2-4 starts of the season, but they closed 5-2 with a 1-point loss at Tulsa and a 5-point loss to the AAC champs in Army at Micheal Stadium. So they were right on the cusp of doing something special at the second half of last season. They returned the best quarterback in the conference, in my opinion, Owen McCown. During that 5-2 finish, he had 17 total touchdowns. Now, the issue here is not his production in terms of TDs. He also averaged 340 total yards per game. He's got to cut down on the hero ball and turning the ball over. Too many turnover-worthy plays that really could throw, a monkey wrench into them climbing the AAC mountain this year. But he returns almost all of the skill position weapons, and we could finally see JT Clark finally suit up again after rotten injury luck. I'm pulling for this guy. He just keeps busting his knees up. If he can be on the field, I think when you add in the returning production at running back and in the receiving core, this could be a really dangerous offense once again. But defensively is where this thing sinks or swims for me. I think there's certainly some serious competition at the top of the AAC, and some of those teams have a little bit of edge in a good way on defense. 5 projected starters for the Roadrunners are transfers, but the good news is that those 5 players were all 3-star gets through the portal. Now, losing Jamori Robinson to West Virginia stings. That's their second straight AAC Defensive Player of the Year to exit. And that's just the way that it goes in G5 land. You have to be able to reload. But I think we have an awesome staff when you look on the defensive side of the ball. Jess Lepp is a former semifinalist for the Broyles Award. He's in his 6th year on this staff. He knows what he's doing. And the reason why I'm targeting the plus 650 to win the AAC and not messing necessarily with the win total is the opening month is going to be rough in terms of what they're seeing from opposing offenses. They open with A&M, then Texas State, then Incarnate Word. I think they're going to probably go 2-1 in that stretch, but they're certainly going to see a variety of offense that I think is going to benefit them down the stretch, being able to stop different looks, power running games, spread attacks, and having that, experience in their 2 deep to be able to say we can stop multiple brands of football. Now, I also can poke holes in some of the other top AAC teams, and I'm going to go ahead and do so. Tulane's fully reloading at the skill positions. Mekhi Hughes has made the trip to the Pacific Northwest. He's going to be starting for the Oregon Ducks, and they're on their 3rd option at quarterback. I know the Ball State kid looked pretty good last year, but they would have preferred to retain the services of Mensa, who's off to Duke, and TJ Finley got himself in legal trouble. So we'll see what it looks like at quarterback for the Green Wave. Navy really struggled offensively when there was enough tape on Drew Cronick's offense, and you saw that in the final month of the season. They ran into a wall multiple times. And then finally, Memphis is replacing Hennigan and Mario Anderson Jr. So I look at this as who's going to stop UTSA if they get everything rolling in the best way possible. Army also doesn't have Captain America in Bryson Daly either. So I think this league is ripe for the taking. My cutoff number for this was 6-1. You can still get plus 650 out in the market. Are you with me on the Roadrunners?
I think there's good value there, and I really like what you said about the top teams in the league kind of coming back to the pack, right? You can poke holes in everybody. Memphis is losing a lot of talent and is breaking in new personnel. Very interesting what you said about Navy. And so with Navy, when they were running that newer scheme with the wing T with Drew Cronick from Mercer, it took some time for teams to get film on the technique and on the nuances of that.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it with the triple option and that rail route up the sideline. How many times did Heidenreich just kill teams before some people finally started to figure out? You saw it in the Notre Dame game. Obviously, the talent disparity was huge, but that was a domino effect to how they played for really the rest of the season. It's not that the offense is cooked. He can make adjustments, but they clearly had the element of the surprise in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season.
Wholeheartedly agree. Same can be said for Army. They're losing so much personnel. You don't have Daly, you don't have Udo at running at fullback, and you're losing some defensive production there as well. Tulane, I mean, you could consider them to be a mess, right? There's just so much that they have to rebuild on, and where are they going to draw from late in the conference slate? I think that UTSA also has a nice schedule that sets up for them to have success early on. They've got a lot of winnable games in conference early, and then they host Tulane, they host East Carolina, who I think actually could surprise this year as well. I think ECU is poised to potentially surprise some teams this season. And then getting Army last game of the season is also, I think, critically huge, because what happens, you don't have to switch gears and prepare for the triple, try and worry about sneaking that in at some other point during the season, and then go back to traditional preparation later. They can focus that last part of it specifically on Army. The only thing that I'll say about that tricky Army spot is that, when they host Army, San Antonio is a military town, and Army shows up for that, and so that's one where Army might have that game circled. They've played well in that dome in the past, kind of showing out as a little bit of a recruiting trip too for their program. So it'll be interesting to see there. But I think UTSA, with what they have returning, I think that they'll be just fine, and they'll have their say in what happens in that league.
Now, I know this is a G5 focus pod, at least when I'm on it. It's the Group of Five deep dive, but I don't mind dabbling in some Power Four looks. And you have one here to close out our buffet of futures picks here in the offseason.
I do. We'll tie it to the G5 because the primary reason why we're talking about this team is because of G5 previous hero of the week, Devin Dampier, who we'll all remember for his heroics at New Mexico, game in and game out. But I think that there was just so much value in Utah, and I think there was a number that we received based on negative perception with how Utah's season went last year and how poorly they played late in the season. But I really like what Utah has added in their position groups this season, and I think that they have a fantastic shot to compete in what I believe to be a wide open Big 12. You have 5 or 6 teams that are all priced relatively similarly to win that league, to include Kansas State, Texas Tech, Arizona State, kind of the usual suspects. But then you and I identified early in the spring that Utah had just such a severely mispriced number. And with the players that they brought in, Power 5 level at the corner position, they brought in some Power 5 transfers on the defensive line. They beefed up their depth at linebacker, which was a concern last year. And then bringing in electric Devin Dampier to run that offense, I think is really critically important. I think one thing that was super uncharacteristic from a Kyle Whittingham coach team is that at times Utah looked so soft last year in the run game. They couldn't pick up first downs on 3rd and 2. They weren't playing with attitude along the offensive line. I would anticipate that totally changes gears this year. I think they're going to get back to running the football. I think having a dual threat in Dampier to run with the other pieces of personnel that Utah is going to rely on in that running system is going to be really critical. And I watched the spring game, and Devin Dampier was throwing darts all spring game, and he really showed off the arm talent. One of the negative criticisms on Dampier was that he can trust that arm a little too much, and he'll throw it into a really tight window, and he did throw some interceptions, so we definitely hope that is something that's curbed back a bit here. But my goodness, I think Utah has just as good a chance as any to kind of make a run. The schedule sets up really nice as well. They get to host Texas Tech. They get to host Arizona State and Kansas State. There will be some spots where they're going to have to play exceptional football. Those are particularly road trips at BYU and Baylor. But with the number that you and I locked in at, I think it was no-brainer that value play had to be made. And the markets agreed with us wholeheartedly as we've seen Utah come down to as low as plus 700 now to win the league. So it was a really good early get for us.
I would encourage everyone, if you missed the episode with Thor Nystrom, I believe it's the last one in the BBOC catalog, go back and listen because he got into 4 teams that he's really high on, and Utah is one of them. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, the 3 of us are all here in lockstep, and it starts with Devin Dampier, but also the skill position talent they brought in to help him. Ryan Davis comes with him from New Mexico, and the player that I mentioned in the last episode, Creed Whitmore from Mississippi State. He could be a yak demon in this offense. The short passing game, the quick game, the RPO, the jet sweeps. He's someone that could really make a name for himself. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, talk about an overreaction from the public. This is one of the most stable coaching staffs in all of college sports, has accomplished an incredible amount, particularly when he has a good quarterback. You go back to Brian Johnson winning the Sugar Bowl over that Alabama team and Nick Saban. When Cam Rising wasn't hurt, they went to back-to-back Rose Bowls. So all of a sudden, for people to be selling on him and this concept of, they're cooked, the Big 12 is just too deep. I mean, I don't understand what the pushback would be. To me, if you have a living, breathing quarterback and you put together your roster in a thoughtful way, you have a chance to win the Big 12. And I think they're certainly there. I grabbed them at 18-1. We're seeing this number all the way down in the 7 to 8-1 neighborhood. If you can get 8-1, I would still pull the trigger. I think there's value there. But really, I'm also targeting that first month of September because most people have not seen Devin Dampier play. And when they close their eyes, they're thinking about that ugly offense from last year for the Utes. That is going to, I think, have an effect and bleed in to some of the public money in that first month. But as we learned last year with the Lobos, once the secret's out, all of a sudden there's going to be a shift in the market. Any other final thoughts you have on your offseason prep? I know that we could go on talking for hours about all the opportunities to really kind of stick it to the books, hang in some stale numbers or some numbers that are predicated more on the 2024 versions of these teams that are long gone.
Yeah, the great thing is we were able to get an early jump on the preparation. I think that sometimes people will use the release of a major college football publication around the 4th of July as a time to start their off-season preparation around the water cooler or the barbecue. But I'll tell you right now that you're too late at that point. There's too much happening in the transfer portal. There's too much dynamically changing in the landscape of the sport. There's 136 FBS teams to follow. And so I would encourage anyone, jump into your preparation earlier, really compress that time that you're starting to dive into these teams and into the schedules and really assess these markets, which still have plenty of value and are oftentimes emerging in popularity. So we here at the Action Network are going to continue to do that and provide winners for you in these markets throughout the summer. So encourage everyone to keep tuning in to our episodes so you can continue to have these nuggets for the future portfolio.
That'll do it for today's episode. Thanks again to Josh for joining us and giving us a look into his futures portfolio. A reminder that you can follow his work over at the Action Network app. I'll be back tomorrow talking college baseball with conference tournament week with Colin Wilson. We're going to be breaking down all the major teams as well as giving some look aheads to the NCAA tournament, regionals, super regionals, all the way in that path to Omaha for the College World Series. Thank you so much for listening and catch us next time here at the Big Bets on Campus.